Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We will give folks just another minute or so to get themselves situated before we begin. All right. Seeing 6:33 here and a packed house already, so we will get going. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for tonight's event on the MCAS ballot question. My name is Emily Dodge. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Deputy Director at Worcester Education Collaborative. We are a small nonprofit here in Worcester working to advance excellence and equity for all Worcester Public School students. And before I dive into any content today, I wanted to do just a bit of housekeeping. And Kyla, whenever you would like to get the slides up and ready, please feel free to do so. Firstly, thank you. Firstly, you can enable the closed captions. Kyla will place the instructions for that in the chat. Regrettably, we are facing some technical challenges, and so we had hoped to be able to have a Spanish interpreter this evening for the event, and we're very sorry to say that that is not going to work for this evening. You could, if you're hoping to access this in Spanish, you could set your closed captions to Spanish following the instructions that Kyla has there in the chat, and my apologies for that. Next, we are very thrilled to see how many folks have joined us this evening. We are at 79 and climbing. So in order to make this run as smoothly as possible, we ask that everyone stay muted, please. Unless during the question and answer portion of the evening, you're asked to come off mute to ask your question, just to allow things to run there. And lastly, we will have, to answer the question that I know we will be asked, yes, we are recording this evening's event. Yes, we will make sure that you get a recording of the event, as well as the event slides. Those will be emailed out to everyone for your reference. And also, please do feel free to share those with anyone else who you think may be interested, who wasn't able to join us this evening, rather. Kyla, ready for the next slide? Wonderful. So this event is being hosted by the Worcester Education Collaborative, Worcester Education Equity Roundtable. The Roundtable is a loose coalition of organizations, about 55 plus organizations and individuals spanning community-based groups, institutions of higher education, parents and caregivers, city agencies, as well as the school district. And together we are working to enhance equity and social justice in what we think of as the Worcester education ecosystem. So to do that, the Roundtable hosts monthly meetings to share information, surface issues and monitor progress on key education activities. We also run work groups as needed on topics such as transportation and educator diversity. And you are all here today because one of our third major functions is to host and sponsor community events to build understanding of education issues. Next slide, please, Kyla. That brings us to this evening's event. So the purpose of tonight's debate is to inform the community with a focus on parents and caregivers about the November 5th statewide ballot question about discontinuing the use of the MCAS as a graduation requirement for public high schools. So our goal tonight is to present both sides of the argument and allow you all to voice questions and concerns that you may have. So in service of that, we will start with an overview of the MCAS itself, as well as the ballot measure, before turning things over to our presenters for some opening statements. Rebuttals will follow, and then the remaining time will be dedicated to questions and answers. So please feel free throughout the session to post any questions or thoughts that you have in the chat, and we will collect those for the Q&A segment. And before I hand things over to Dina, I would love to, with the now 92 folks that we have in the room, I would love to do a quick poll to get a sense of the temperature and where folks are kind of coming into tonight, standing on this MCAS ballot question. So in just a minute, I will launch a anonymous and one question poll. So if you are so inclined, please feel free to weigh in here, either voting yes, no, or that you're coming in undecided or don't yet have enough information. I'll just give folks another couple seconds to wrap that up. Wonderful. So let me share the results. We have about 51% of folks are coming in tonight planning to vote yes to eliminate the MCAS as a graduation requirement. The next largest group is 35% of folks are undecided or are looking for more information. So you are in the right place. Thank you for joining us. And 14% planning coming into today, planning to vote no to maintain the MCAS graduation requirement. Wonderful. So thank you for humoring us there. Now, please allow me to turn things over to our wonderful moderator for the evening, Dina Tedeschi. Dina is a family and community engagement specialist at Worcester Education Collaborative and a seasoned parent advocate. She is the president and co-treasurer of the Worcester chapter of the National Organization for Women, and the parent representative and co-chair of the Family, Equity, and Engagement Subcommittee of the Department of Public Health's Interagency Coordinating Council. She was also the former president of the Norback Avenue School PTO. Welcome, Dina, and thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Emily, for that introduction. I greatly appreciated. And a huge thank you to the expert team behind the scenes at Worcester Education Collaborative for making tonight possible. I want to welcome our viewers and our guests, and thank you for joining us tonight on this important ballot initiative. We look forward to hearing from our speakers and learning more about this ballot question. And would you mind going to the next? Oh. Sorry, it was asking for me to translate, and I don't think that was what I needed to do. Okay, so thank you. So first, before we get started, I want to explain a little bit about why we're here tonight. And so, which is to discuss the ballot question number 2 that's on the ballot for all Massachusetts voters and on election day for November 5th. So Tuesday, November 5th. So first, the ballot question proposing here is to eliminate MCAS as a requirement to graduate high school. A vote of yes would eliminate MCAS from graduation requirement, not eliminate MCAS. And a vote of no would be to maintain MCAS as a high school graduation requirement. So let's take a minute to talk about MCAS. Would you mind going to the next screen, Kyla? Thank you. So let's take a minute to talk about MCAS, which may be unfamiliar concept, especially if you don't have children in grades 3 and up and didn't take MCAS when you were a student in school. Back in the 90s, MCAS was created in response to federal guidelines and requirements to ensure high learning standards and to measure students' knowledge of key concepts and skills. It is a series of tests given to all students in grades 3 through 8 and then high school, covering topics such as English language arts or ELA, math, science, technology, and engineering, and civics. Each exam is given over the course of 2 days and is about 1 to 2 hours long for each. MCAS isn't the only source of testing for students. Each student is required to meet their district's academic requirements or credits for in order to graduate as well. And again, MCAS applies to all public school students in Massachusetts. Kyla, would you mind going to the next slide, please? Thank you so much. And so there's a couple of common questions that come up regarding MCAS. And just to mention to the audience, again, if you have any questions, feel free to add them to the chat and we'll work to address as many of those as possible after the presentations. So the questions here you can see, if this passes, does my child still need to take MCAS? Yes, MCAS is still a requirement, only the graduation requirement would be eliminated. Are there other ways for my child to graduate if they don't pass MCAS? Yes, you can do a few things. One is they can retake the test multiple times. They can also complete an education proficiency plan or EPP if they earn a less than passing score, or they can complete a competency, demonstrate competency through other measures like a portfolio, for example. How many Worcester Public School students are affected by this if they don't pass MCAS? Annually, about 20 students out of about 1,900. So it's a small margin. And are private school or homeschooled students required to take MCAS? And no, they are not. This does not affect them. So now that we've covered some basics, let's hear from our speakers. Would you mind, Kyla? I think we're gonna, just want to mention here, there's some information about Election Day, November 5th. There's also, it'll wind up in the chats now and probably later on as well, some voter resources. So if you're not registered yet to vote, or you're not sure if you are an active registered voter, you'll be able to click those links and that'll bring you to the state website to take care of that, as well as to find your polling location. And additionally, we do have the early voting schedule available in English and Spanish for Worcester. And that will begin, early voting for the November election will begin October 19th. The deadline to register to vote is Saturday, October 26th. So just some dates to keep in mind. Last day to register, the 26th of November, 26th of October, excuse me, and then November 5th is election day. All right. Thank you so much. So just a quick reminder to our speakers, if you could speak slowly and with some pauses. I know that we were going to work with the translator here, but also for the closed caption purposes here, if anyone is translating those closed caption. Each speaker will have about 10 minutes for their opening statement, and then there will be opportunities for responses. So thank you. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Melissa Verdier. Melissa has been the president of the Education Association of Worcester, or EAW, since July of 2022. She is a longtime special educator at Worcester's North High School, began her career as a paraeducator while working on her master's degree in special education. And in the 2002 to 2003 school year, she began teaching in special education small group classes. Melissa, the mic is yours.
Hi, thank you so much, Dina. I really appreciate all of that. The first thing I would like to say is I really would like to apologize. I'm feeling very under the weather tonight. So if you see me reading my notes, it's just that I don't want to have a brain fog and forget what I wanted to say. So I do apologize for that. I also did not want to see this get canceled or rescheduled because I know a lot of people put a lot of work into this. So I rallied up and I'm here. That being said, I just wanted to introduce myself as I am the EAW president. I have been since July 2nd of 2022. Prior to that, I was a special education teacher, as Dina said. I worked both in small group and I did multiple classes in inclusion as well. So I have a lot of extensive knowledge to the MCAS exam. My first full year teaching was 2002, 2003, which was the first year that the MCAS was a graduation requirement for students. I'm also the parent of 2 Worcester Public Schools students who actually go to Norback, where Dina was the PTO president for a long time. So I want to mention that piece too, as this does affect my family as well. So, you know, over the course of my career, I've seen how using the MCAS exam as a graduation requirement has become deeply flawed policy that affects all of the students, not just the ones who don't pass and are denied a diploma. It is something that affects all students. You have to think about the amount of testing that goes into these requirements and how disruptive that is to a student learning day. I will be voting yes on question 2 to eliminate the MCAS graduation requirement. I know it's the right thing to do for students, including my own 2 children who are in the Worcester Public Schools. That being said, when my children get nervous about taking the MCAS, I make sure that they know that to me and to their teachers, this is a practice. And it's so their teachers can see where they need help and what standards they're not performing to grade level at. And that is the part of MCAS that I can support. Voting yes does not eliminate the practice of taking the MCAS, as I said. It's giving students the test year to year as it is now from 3rd grade on. And they receive the same data from the exams that we currently receive now, whether or not the test is used as a graduation requirement or not. We use those scores, as I said, as a teacher, and I hope my children's teachers as well. I'm pretty sure they do based on my knowledge of them. We use that information to see how we need to tailor our teaching and to look at what parts of the standards might have been more difficult and tougher for kids to really grasp. So it gives us an opportunity to look at those things and tailor the teaching, but not teach to a test. Voting yes on 2 shifts the emphasis back to the state's high standards. We're in Massachusetts. We have an amazing academic standards and the curriculum frameworks that we use. I've seen them change over the years. So it's not something that's just, this is what it is and it's going to stay that way forever. It's constantly looked at and tweaked and just to see what is really important going into the future, going into careers, going into college, that type of thing. You know, like I said, the notion that every school district will have its own set of standards is just not true. We have a set of standards in Massachusetts that we are all required to teach to the standards, not to the test, to the standards. I think it's really important that we look at that graduation requirement because Massachusetts is one of the states that uses a core set of standards, and those standards of things that you need to do before you receive a diploma, those will not change. The only thing that would change is that high stakes test. That one thing will change whether or not you have done your 12 to 14 years of schooling, depending on if you did pre-K, and deciding whether or not you deserve a diploma. And I have seen very many times students who can meet the standards in the classroom, but the test is just difficult. So, you know, along those lines we have really high standards for our teachers as well. And not only do we have to pass our own exams to become teachers and be able to prove that we know our standards and our curriculum, we also have to show that we've made improvements to that every 5 years by renewing our license with DESE. So this, again, is not a one and done. You're not licensed once and that's it for your career. You are continually building on your skills. So, another thing being said, being that we have highly educated educators, we are able to look at our students' skills and really judge how they do on a daily basis by giving assessments in class, whether that be formative or summative. But we look constantly to see how students are doing and to tweak our lessons to meet their needs. Excuse me. So, I'm able to make adjustments. I'm able to tailor assignments because I know what my students need based on the fact that I have built relationships with them. I have watched them daily practice their work, and I know where skills are lacking and what areas need to be focused on. And as I said, we do use the MCAS scores. We look at different trends and we look at the different types of questions to see where students struggle. Is it the struggling of picking a multiple choice answer? Is it a struggle to answer an open response question? Perhaps we need to look and get more critical thinking with our students and do that in the classroom together so that I'm able to help them as needed. As I said, I was a special education teacher for 20 plus years. And in all that time in classes, we modify the curriculum and we modify it. We don't lessen it, we modify it and we make it more adaptable for students. And we bring it to their baseline so that they're able to walk away knowing the information. And the testing, the MCAS testing does not do that. It never looks at modifying the test for a student. You might see accommodations happen. That's great. But part of being in special education is having modified curriculum when necessary. So, I'm sure that everyone watching will agree that there's a concern in the fact that this particular year, when we looked at the 2023 release scores, it is quite different. And it shows about, I want to get this number correct, 16,000 students did not meet the cutoff score on at least one of their 10th grade MCAS exams. So I know we are coming out of a pandemic, but that's a big number, 16,000 students across the state. I look at that and I think of that 16,000 kids that are going to have to take the retest this fall. And if they don't pass, then they're going to have to take it again in the spring. And if they don't pass it then they have to take it again the next fall. So although the MCAS testing will not go away, which again, I say is a good thing for helping educators fine-tune their teaching, I do think that the idea that students who don't pass have to take that test continually throughout their high school career is detrimental to their education. You have to think about if a student fails math and ELA, that's 5 days of testing. And I know that Dina at the very beginning said that's about 1 to 2 hours in those 5 days. I've proctored these exams. I've never seen one end in an hour. I've never seen one end in 2 hours. In fact, I've been there after the school bell rings because once they leave for the day, they cannot go back to that test. So I've been in the room when we've let kids stay after that 1:43 bell till 2:15, 2:30, so that they can finish their thoughts and give it the best opportunity that they have. As I said, students that do not pass the MCAS will have to take a retest. Others will appeal it or try an alternative plan. The appeal process is what I believe education should be. And the appeal process is the teacher, the educator of the student, signing off that that student has met the standards in their class. And I can say, in all my years of teaching, if you've passed my class, you've met the standards. And just because somebody can't meet those standards on a test should not throw away 13 or 14 years of education. So I think we need to also think about Worcester as a gateway society, a gateway city, and an urban school district, and think about the high levels of special education and multilingual learners that we have in our classrooms. If you recently moved into the United States, and I would say into Massachusetts specifically, I would say about 2 weeks you've been in and MCAS is starting, you're taking that test. If English is not your first language and Spanish is, you're lucky, because in those first 2 years, you can take math and biology in Spanish, not English, but math and biology. If you come into the United States and you're an English language learner, there is another test that you have to take every year, which is a lot more expensive, and that's the access testing. And I say that because we're talking about the same kids that are not passing this test are doing 5 days of testing in the fall and the spring, as well as doing a week of access testing as well. So much time out of the classroom where that's where they need to be. That's where lessons are learned. That's where life lessons are learned. I just feel it's grossly unfair to deny a student a diploma because of a single test. Denying students a diploma jeopardizes their future and penalizes students in a harsh way, based on results of one imperfect measuring tool. So, as Dina said earlier, there are ways to not have to take the MCAS. And right now, parents have the opportunity to opt their students out of taking MCAS. But in the 10th grade, if they don't take the MCAS, they do not receive a diploma. They could be homeschooled and still receive their diploma. If you are economically advantaged and your parents can afford to send you to a private school, whether that be a regular private school or a parochial private school, again, you don't have to take the MCAS. That's not affected. I want to say that educators are committed to preparing every student for a bright future, whether that be higher ed, whether that be the workforce, or whether that be career training. And our business leaders and our colleges tell us they need graduates who are critical thinkers, problem solvers, and team players. I can't seem to figure out how the MCAS test ensures that in our students. And again, because of the harsh penalty, the high stakes of MCAS have trickled down to every grade level. So there's time devoted to test prep as well as the actual test taking time. And that's losing hands-on opportunities. That's losing classroom discourse. That's losing more individualized attention from a teacher. And let's be honest, if you are in a test all day, you're not receiving your special ed services. Voting yes on question 2 protects our state's high standards, our high academic standards, and it ends the harm caused by high stakes testing.
Thank you so much, Melissa. We appreciate your
Thank
expertise
you.
and years of service in the Worcester Public Schools as well. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Tim Murray. Tim became president and CEO of the Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce in June of 2013. Previously, he served as the Lieutenant Governor of Massachusetts from 2007 to 2013. And prior to that, he served as a member of the Worcester City Council for 9 years, with during that time as mayor of Worcester for 5 years. Tim, the mic is yours.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here and be with Melissa. Her dad and I were high school graduates from St. John's together a few years back, and I had the privilege to work with Melissa's dad when I was mayor in that beginning in that 22-23 period when the MCAS passing the MCAS test as sophomore became a graduation requirement. Some people may remember that. Well, the education reform was passed back in 1993. It took time to develop the curriculum frameworks that have been referred to. It took time to develop the tests and the questions with a lot of educator input throughout that. And it was in 2003, when it became a requirement. And this whole conversation over the last few days, as we've gotten ready for this conversation or debate, has kind of jogged my memory a little bit with some of those experiences. I recall that prior to the 2003, where it became a condition to pass it as a high school graduation, the students weren't taking it too serious. And we saw a significant jump when it became a requirement. There was a lot of consternation about what would happen, but when it became a condition of requirement, we saw students respond, and they were able to do so based on the great work that our educators have done. Let me just start with some data. In fiscal year 2022, it's estimated that Massachusetts taxpayers of all types contributed over $20 billion to fund the pre-K through 12 public education system, to make sure that Massachusetts children, when they graduate, will have educational skill level that will allow them to either go on to college or to compete in the workplace, which I think we would all agree has become increasingly demanding and complex. Accordingly, given the size and scale of this annual taxpayer investment, we believe that it's reasonable to have a statewide assessment, a uniform assessment, to ensure that all children have these baseline skills, rather than their own separate assessment and high school graduation requirements set by each district. This is why the MCAS was established in 1993, to create a statewide assessment tool. And as I mentioned, in 2003, it became a condition, a requirement for graduation. And what does it show? What does it do? It demonstrates that high school sophomores must pass the MCAS in order to graduate from high school and make sure that they're proficient in English, arts, math, and English language arts, math, and science. They're tested on a sophomore level skills, and they need to make sure that they're proficient at sophomore 10th grade levels. The good news is that in 2019, 88.4% of all students passed the exam on their first attempt. And as has been mentioned, retests are allowed. Tutoring support and processes that include the cohort and portfolio appeals, and those are available to those who are unable to pass the MCAS after they have taken it a number of times. They are able to submit. There was a data point that I saw recently that said, of the students that don't pass statewide, which has been estimated, and in some of the information, about 700 students approximately statewide on a yearly basis do not pass, that only 25-30% actually submit appeals. So that raises a question as to were there other issues that made them not eligible, or are they getting the support and guidance to go through that appeal process? The establishment and implementation of high standards for students and teachers has resulted in Massachusetts being ranked number one in the nation in many different student achievement measures. And again, that's a credit to the students' hard work and the great work that our educators do on a lot of levels. And, my wife works in special ed in the public schools. I've a sister that's a principal, brother-in-law who's a teacher, sister-in-law, all in the public schools. And I recognize how hard they work to make sure that our students are given the skills and taught the concepts to do well, not just in the test, but in their coursework as well. I would agree that the MCAS is not a perfect tool. I think we agree that improvements could be made to more fully assess the educational attainment levels of students. However, in the absence of an improved statewide alternative, it would be a mistake to get rid of this as a requirement without a statewide assessment tool. We know that when students pass the test, that they're more likely to do well educationally as they go on. We also know economically that they do better as well. And I referenced the Brown University study that was done by the Annenberg Institute that looked at some of that data over the years. So there is a correlation in terms of their success rate by passing this. So as I said, we think this is an important diagnostic tool as well as a statewide assessment. that helps make sure that that $20 billion that's invested annually into the public education system ensures that these high school students, upon obtaining their diploma, are at least proficient at a sophomore level in English language arts, math, and science.
Thank you so much, Tim, for your presentation and your expertise. It's all so valuable tonight. I would like to, so what we'll do is we'll give Melissa a few minutes to respond to the statement by Tim and then vice versa.
Okay, thank you, Dina. So I'm just listening to a few things that Tim said. And high school sophomores. So the test is also a ninth grade test if students take biology, and could be either 10th or 11th grade test if you take chemistry or physics. So it isn't just 10th grade standards, but I want to make something clear, and that is that to become a special education student, you have to be working below grade level. And that does not mean that the standards that I provide are not grade level standards. They are. And that's why we modify the curriculum. So they're still meeting the same standards in my special education class that they would meet in a regular education class, but the curriculum's been modified to meet their academic level. Like I said, same standards, but the test is not modified. And I will say that again, the test is not modified. There are accommodations made. And those accommodations, for instance, for a student to use a calculator, according to DESE, they literally cannot add 1 + 1. I think there are many students that could use a calculator because that is a deterrent. When they're taking the test, it's going to take them more time without the calculator, which, let's be honest, I'm pretty sure every one of us has one of these that when we need to do math, we use a calculator for. But if you can add 1 + 1, you don't get a calculator on the MCAS test, according to the DESE requirements. He also said in 2019, 88.4% were proficient on their first attempt. That means that many, many students, and so what about 12%, a little less than 12% of students have to take that test multiple times. And he said retests are allowed. I'm going to tell you from a public education standpoint, retests are mandated. Students have to take that test. If you have failed, your name is called to attend that test on the retake day. If you do not take that test, your family will be called. There's a possibility that you'll be called to the office to speak with your administrator, and maybe a guidance counselor will come down too, because everybody knows that you really need to take that test. It's not really an allowed to take, it's a mandate to take. Two other points I would like to make. I don't know how much time I have, but I'm gonna be real quick with this one. So when we say that students that don't pass the MCAS don't do well academically as we're moving on, there's no way to actually know that, because failing the MCAS denies them the opportunity to move on to higher education. So we don't know. They absolutely could go on to higher education and do very well. I can tell you that my college courses were much different than my high school courses in any standardized test I ever took. And Tim, you mentioned that your wife is the director of special ed and that you have principals and teachers in your family. I'm curious what their thoughts are on this. Are they voting yes or are they voting no?
Melissa, some of them are your members, so you can chat with them and ask them what their thoughts are. But I guess I would say, is this really a high stakes test when you look at the numbers? And if there's 70,000 plus students that take this test, high schools, sophomores who take it, and it's estimated that 700 do not pass after they take the retest or submit their cohort or peer portfolio, go through that appeal process. It would seem that the majority of the students are able to successfully pass that, even in situations where they may have to take the test again or utilize one of those other appeals. And in Worcester, I mean, some of the data that's been shared with us here is that of the roughly 1,900 that take the test, only 21 did not pass. So is it really a high stakes test, asking them to show competency basically at sophomore level? And I guess some of this is also philosophically, don't we believe that we want to hold our kids to kind of high standards? I think they've demonstrated that, again, I use this going back to 2003 when this became a requirement, that most kids have been able to do that. Most of the students have been able to do that, and certainly think there are ways to improve the MCAS. And people talk about, adding elements to it in terms of the assessment, but to leave it to basically vote yes on question 2, we're saying we're abandoning a uniform statewide assessment. We're going to let 350 plus school districts do their own interpretation of the state curriculum, and they're going to do their own interpretation. We're not going to have a uniform assessment we'll be able to point out inequities and disparities and determine what's happening in certain communities that may have particular challenges for a variety of different ways. So I would rather us be one of those states that have the high standards that we're pushing, and it makes sense in terms of what the ultimate outcome is. When students reach these goals and meet these levels and pass the coursework and pass the exam, they're generally more successful in completing college. They're generally more successful during the course of their lives in terms of their earnings, and that's laid out in the Annenberg Institute report from Brown as well. And it's a return on investment. As taxpayers, we make these investments. I think it's only fair that we want the students to come out with at least like a baseline level of competency, being able to master material at a sophomore level.
Thank you both for your time, your opinions, your expertise. It's incredibly valuable for all the families that are here tonight, caregivers, community members, partners, everyone. You may have touched upon some of these questions that we'll talk about in a minute, but it'll be helpful for some viewers to learn a little bit more about these statements that you've made. And just a reminder for our viewers, if you do have questions, please put them in the chat. I'm not able to see the chat and while I have the various screens open, so there's a team behind the scenes taking care of that, and we'll do our best to bring those forward. Also, as a reminder for anyone who may be joined in late, there are links in the chat, or will be links in the chat, regarding voter registration information, early voting, and other information about the upcoming election day on Tuesday, November 5th. For Melissa, I have a question. So Tim had mentioned that, in Worcester, 21 out of about 1,900 students did not pass the test. That number extracted out from 700 out of 70,000 students statewide that did not graduate because of their failure. They failed. They were not able to pass MCAS. And is this small number enough of a problem to require this major change like this for graduation requirements?
Okay, so I do think that it is high stakes when you're talking about 21 students that aren't going to receive a diploma. So I still see this as a high stakes test. But those 21 students may have taken the retest in the fall and the spring of their junior year, in the fall and the spring of their senior year. And I can speak directly to the students that don't pass it in any of those years. So in the 10th grade, I've had many students say to me, "Sorry, miss, I'm just going to drop out." And I beg them not to, because there is so much more to their high school education than a test. And that test tells me very little about who they are and what they can do and what their skills are and how they will perform in the future. So that's my first piece. So then we come to the end, and that's also those 21 students might have been the students that maybe didn't get an appeal. And perhaps that they have health reasons that they've been out of school, so their attendance was low. Or perhaps they are a student that must take care of their family and has to miss school for those kinds of things. As I've seen it many times, it happens very often. So I do still think that eliminating this as a graduation requirement does not change the standards in this state, does not affect the way that we teach in school, except for possibly not teaching to the test, and really helps us to send to the world a well-rounded student who's not just focused on science, math, and English.
Thank you. And you had mentioned about that requirement. Someone else asked in the chat. Find the question here.
Was it the number of
When
states?
students, excuse me. So you had mentioned before, and then just to clarify, there was a couple of viewers who put in the chat, if they are required to retake that multiple tests, right? So there could be a year where they have 3 tests in spring cycle or winter cycle, and then if they don't pass any of those, then they are required to take that in the fall. I just want to clarify that, and then they just will be able to repeat that process. That's question 1, and then the other piece of that means that they are not in regular instruction during those times.
Right. So not only are they not in regular instruction, I'm not, because I'm a proctor. So you have to have 2 proctors in every room. So even if there is only, if you're in a small group room with 10 kids, that's 2 proctors. So you're taking teachers out of the regular classroom and that opportunity for learning. So like I said, if you fail biology, that's a 1-day retest. If you fail ELA, that's a 3-day retest. If you fail math, that's a 2-day retest. So let's say you have to take them all in the fall. That's 5 days of testing for ELA and math, and a test in biology. Science retests are only once a year. And then again, you're taking those tests again in March, and that's when the retest is for ELA and math. And as I said, there's only that one time. So that's 11. If you failed all 3 sections, that's 11 retests in 1 year. And that's 11 days that I, as a proctor, am out of the classroom. Not to mention the number of days that we have to work on getting kids ready for the test. And the other question was the first one. I don't know if I answered that. Sorry.
That's okay. So that I think you answered it both, but basically
Okay.
that the timeline of retaking that test, what that looks like.
Yep.
And then of course you indicated that if they didn't pass the biology, that's waiting until the next spring. It's not a fall. And then
Yep.
they would not be in the classroom during that, they don't have general instruction
Right.
during those retake
And
times.
another thing I wanted,
it's squeezed in is we're
Right.
just trying to,
No,
like
it's
what we might, maybe folks might think of a test retake that happens, if they miss their Spanish quiz or something like that they are looking to take it. It's like repeating the process again.
Yep. And I just want to say that the first time you take it, if you take biology, you take it 1 day in the 9th grade.
Okay.
If you take the first time you take the ELA test in the 10th grade, it's 3 days in March. You don't take the math until May. But when you retest, 5 days in a row.
Gotcha. Thank you. Tim, so supporters of the MCAS as the graduation requirement say that it evens the graduation standards, which is some of what you've talked about already, and upholds those learning standards. In the absence of this requirement, how would you expect districts, and specifically maybe Worcester, uphold these standards?
Well, I think that's kind of the concern, right? Where this ballot question is being proposed without a statewide, across the board uniform standard. And you're going to have every district interpreting kind of the curriculum requirements differently. There's nothing to compare apples to apples across the state without a uniform standard, a uniform test. I agree that there are ways that the MCAS can be improved, but I think it's really important. And one of the reasons we have, as a state, are now, when MCAS started, we were not number 1 in the country, but we collectively, the work that's been done over the years has allowed us across the board and a number of different tests to be tops in the country. So it would seem to me, let's make the improvements that need to be made. But whether you're looking at the data statewide, and you talked about it, Dina, 70,000 students, we've got 1% fail rate. We should be focusing intensively with services on that 1%. We shouldn't be, because of that 1%, then lowering the bar and expectations and diluting what we expect of our kids. We know that the work world of work and higher ed for those that choose to go on is going to require of them. And, Melissa had cited some DESE data earlier. Well, DESE also, the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education says that 1% of class time each year is focused on testing on average. So that doesn't seem unreasonable when you look at the whole year in terms of what students are spending their time on working with their teachers. So I just think it's really important if this is working, and by and large it is, why would we retreat? Why would we abandon high standards and high expectations for our kids? Let's focus on where we know that there's some improvements need to be made, and really concentrate vigorously in Worcester on that 1% that are not passing, and statewide on the 700 that are not. As I mentioned, there was some data that I saw that of the 700 statewide, only 25% exhaust their appeal process. So I just think it's important that we keep those high standards and continue to work on an alternative. But this ballot question, there's no alternative. You're going to have 350 plus whatever districts doing their own thing.
Thank you. Melissa, I think this would be a good question for you, and it was mentioned a little bit already about having teachers teach to the test. You see this as a problem? You don't see this as a problem?
I absolutely see it as a problem. We're not focusing on the standard. We're focusing on how to pass a test. I think I disagree with what the no on to statements are. The standards are not going away. The standards are not being weakened. The standards did not get better because of MCAS. The standards got better because of the reform that goes on in education all the time. As I said, in my 20 years of teaching, I've seen the curriculum standards change in math. That's my focus. I was a special ed math teacher. So I've absolutely seen that change. What I don't see is how a student who can meet the standards in the classroom setting, who has been in a classroom setting with a highly educated educator who has passed all of their testing and met all their requirements, how am I not able to make the decision on whether or not my students have met those standards? We mentioned DESE. DESE also has requirements for schools, not just about testing, but about the things that we teach in schools. That doesn't change across the state. I've noticed in the chat, there's been a couple questions about how many states actually take standardized testing to meet a graduation requirement. 8 states. And I'm not going to name all of them because I don't want to be compared to most of them. But there are only 8 states in this country that require a standardized test as a graduation requirement. There are, like I said earlier, there are other requirements that need to be met. So if you fail your MCAS test, but you have not met your class requirements, you are still not graduating. You're not going to get a diploma. You have to meet those standards in the school setting. I'm going to tell you right now, if there was an MCAS test on physical education, I wouldn't have gotten a diploma.
Thank you, Melissa. I appreciate that. And Tim, you had mentioned, as not only as being a longstanding community member, but now connected in the Chamber of Commerce with the businesses and how the workforce and the local employers. Can you talk a little bit at all about, have there been any comments or thoughts that have been presented by local businesses or business leaders, employers, about how the MCAS affected them and their workforce?
Well, I would just like to respond to one thing. The only remaining statewide graduation standard that would exist if this question passes would be that all students have to take 4 years of gym. So that would be the only.
Tim, that's not accurate.
So
that's not accurate.
That's the only thing the state says you have to do.
No.
Everything else is going to be left to the districts to interpret. So
and
we're not
one of the district that use the mass core standards. Sorry, I don't mean to.
Yeah, we won't have a uniform assessment across the state. So again, if the majority of students statewide, if a majority of the students here in Worcester are passing this test, then I would say that what we need to do is focus on those students that are not, getting them the supports and assistance that they need, make sure they're fully exhausting the appeals processes and that's available to them, whether it be through the portfolio or the cohort, if they're not successful when they do the retests. We want to have high standards. I don't want to compare Massachusetts to Alabama or Mississippi or states that are at the bottom in all these areas. We want, if we're going to compete as a state, if we're going to give the very best to our kids, when they go into the world of work or go on to higher ed, we need to have high standards for them. And we need to be able to have a uniform assessment across the board. The MCAS can be improved, but we shouldn't abandon it, which is what this question would do, because we do not have something, a uniform standard across the board, that will be utilized across the state as it stands right now.
Thank you. And Melissa, I just want to ask another question, and then I'm going to kind of toggle back to some of the audience questions. Do you see that parents and caregivers are, if there's a student that's struggling with the MCAS, do you see that there's a support response for parents and caregivers when they need to retake this test, or multiple tests?
I think it really depends on the student and where their parents are at. So as I've said, I worked in special education. I had students that had come directly from another country, and perhaps their parents don't quite understand and have to learn that with their children. They're learning at the same time that their child is learning that if I don't pass this test, I'm not going to get a high school diploma. So that's a really tough thing for parents. And I don't think that the parents necessarily, they want their kids to pass. There's no doubt about that, because they know without passing, they're not going to get a diploma. This is a little off of that, but I had one student who, parent very involved, very much wanted their student to get his high school diploma. He came back for 5 years. I had that student come take the test for 5 years because he wanted his diploma so badly. He was 23 years old when he finally passed. That's great. But that's 5 years that he could have been doing career work, or been, being trained in a career, or possibly had gone on to higher education. He was not a bad student per se. He was not a good tester. And so that's part of it. So do I think parents are involved in wanting their students to pass? Absolutely. But I don't think that it's always understood as to what that means. And I will tell you, in the number of Know Your School nights that I've been to this year, and speaking with parents and speaking them about MCAS graduation requirements, they're happy to see the test stay and the standards stay, but they're very happy to vote yes, because the standards are not going away. The test is not going away. It's still there. It's just not a requirement for graduation. But in Worcester, and there are people here that are not Worcester, so many other districts use the Mass Core standards. And that is something that Worcester uses now. So it's not just the 4 years of gym. They need 4 English, 4 math, 3 science, 3 history, 2 foreign language, and arts, gym, health. It's a lot more than just 4 years of gym.
Thank you. So I've got a couple of attendee questions. And so one question is there any evidence that high scores on the test are correlated with career success? I don't know if either of you, both.
I would just go back to Brown University. The Annenberg Institute did a study about the MCAS, and they broke it down in a number of different areas. And the data shows that, generally speaking, those students that pass or do well on the test as well, but even if they just pass at the proficient basic level, their success in college and in terms of their career earnings, if they go into the world of work, are better than those students who do not pass. And that came out in July of 2024.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. And I think a counter to that question would be, and that I come up with here is, how many students that didn't pass it that might be feeling pressure to leave school early, because the minimum age you can leave your high school years is 16. So by 16, they've at least taken a couple of those tests. And I wonder, and I know no one may not have that statistic, but I would be curious to ask and know what the dropout rate might be for those students that are unsuccessful in passing.
Well, Dina, I do have some information that
great.
is relevant to your question, and I think
Thank you.
I think it speaks to why having this uniform standard across the state is important. So this is the good news. This is relative to the city of Worcester, that compared to 2019 and 2023, approximately 82.8% of the class of 2023 graduated. The college matriculation rates, about 61% of those graduates enrolled in post-secondary education. Those 61% that graduated, how many of that 61% graduated within 6 years? Unfortunately, only 27% of the students who enrolled in college earned a degree within 6 years. So Worcester Public Schools graduation rate moved up from 2019. Now it's 82.8%. The statewide average is 89.1%. As I mentioned, college matriculation rates, Worcester, 61% graduates enrolled in post-secondary education. The statewide average was 73%. 27% completed by 6 years. Statewide, 54% completed within 6 years. So there's a value to having, we can see the success rate in terms of their ability to complete college, go into the world of work and earn. There's a correlation from those that pass and their success rates. So again, to retreat and abandon a statewide standard that overwhelming number of students are passing because of a small percentage that is not, seems to be the opposite way we should be going if we want to compete as a state and we want to empower our young people to be successful, whether they go into right to college or they go into the world of work. And as I said, what we should be doing is working on those individuals that need those extra supports and services, as opposed to retreating on these standards, which have allowed Massachusetts to be at the top on so many different levels since MCAS has come into existence.
Thank you. I'm glad that you had that. We're able to share that data. That's great.
I actually would like to respond to both of those.
Please.
So one being, how can we judge how students who don't pass the test do in their careers when we have denied them a diploma? So we do not know if students who pass all of their courses and don't pass that test do well in their career because we've denied them a diploma. So we're already making that more difficult because they don't have the diploma, which allows them to go on to higher education, which allows them to go on to direct career training. And we've taken that away. So all we can go on are those entry-level positions that they may go into that don't require a diploma. I cannot think of very many financially, I can't think of the word I want right now. I'm sorry. Like I said, I'm under the weather, but I can't think of many careers that you can go into without a diploma that are going to bring you financial wealth. And so it's very difficult to say that, whether or not they would do well in their careers post high school. I think it's also important to say that many, and I would gander to say most of the students who do not pass the MCAS are either English language learners, students with special needs, or some special education needs. And those who are probably do not meet all of the coursework requirements. And that coursework requirement is that's going to be the telltale of whether or not the student should get a high school diploma. And so I think that those are important things to look at.
Thank you so much. So a comment or a question rather from one of the attendees is talking about without this requirement in place, how do we make sure administrators and teachers aren't pushing students through or fudging grades expectations to make sure that they get their diploma and therefore not get transition / 18 to 22 services?
Well, I think it's a great question, and it's one of the reasons why the MCAS was established. And again, to go back, and I know some of the names that are that have joined us, but the whole bargain in 1993 was that unprecedented amounts of state tax revenue would be increased over time to go into public education, because we understood that it was needed. We saw these disparities and inequities across the state, particularly in economically disadvantaged gateway cities compared to suburban communities. And so the whole point of education reform and the billions that were put into education was that we would have a standard that we could collectively measure ourselves by. And it has been a factor in how money has then been directed to many of those economically disadvantaged communities as well. So on multiple levels, it has been a really important tool as well in terms of helping guide where resources go. So I come back to, for overwhelming majority of students here in the city of Worcester, and my two daughters are recent graduates of the Worcester Public Schools, and like many on this call, care deeply about our students. But we need to, I think, do everything we can to maintain and improve upon what we've got, rather than abandon something that, while not perfect, overwhelming number of students have responded to. The lion's share of that credit goes to their educators over the years. And I also want to point out that teachers are involved in the standards for the test and the questions, in addition to the curriculum frameworks that were developed. So they're active participants in this process throughout over the years. So this, as I said, we can improve upon it. I think there are ways to do that, but overwhelming number of students here in Worcester across the state are able to reach that sophomore level proficiency. And again, I think we the challenges that we face and our young people face today, we shouldn't be going backwards. And that's what the employers want. Employers need, and whether they go on to college or not, they need to make sure that people have baseline skills.
I just go back to what I said before about that we know that colleges and employers are looking for team players, are looking for I wish I could find what I was exactly saying. For critical thinking, problem solving.
Melissa, let me interrupt you for just 1 second. As we're getting close out of time, I wanted to say, if you want to use this opportunity for like 20 to 30 seconds for your final comments or statement, and then also I'll give that to Tim, and then so we've got a little bit more information to just cover with some attendees, and then regarding our poll and some information we want to share about voting. So just want to, if that's all right with you, so we can
absolutely. So what I was saying is that we know that our business leaders in colleges saying that we want critical thinkers, problem solvers, and team players. I still go back to that question. I can't see how the MCAS shows those things. I can't see how we're proving that kids are team players. Maybe problem solving, I'll give you maybe, but not critical thinking. I think when these aren't the type of questions that you are using real critical thinking in, you might be problem solving. So I say that, and I want to go back to this because, again, the commercials I've seen on question 2 and some of the things that Tim has said tonight, we are not weakening the standards. We are not taking the standards away. In fact, the test is not going away. The only thing that goes away is that graduation requirement of passing the test. And we're never going to know what these students who cannot pass the test can do out in the world, out in the real world, and out in career, and out in their jobs for life, what they can do if we don't give them the opportunity to have a diploma. They've completed those years. They've done their coursework. They should be able to hold their head high and not feel the cost that they feel for not passing that test throughout the rest of their life. And they should not feel like my student who came back for 5 years so that he could get a diploma. I don't think that we really look at, yes, you might say it's 2021 students. That's only the kids that they could have all taken retests to, and you're taking them away from coursework. And, you know, I just still feel like those 21 students, if they've met all their other requirements, and in Worcester, we do use the Common Core, so it's not just the gym requirement. They've met all those other requirements and they've done their schooling for 13, 14 years, and they get a certificate of attainment. Not okay.
Thank you, Melissa. I'll give you some time, Tim, to do a quick wrap up of your comments or pitch.
Yeah, I would, first appreciate Melissa joining Melissa and her stepping up, especially when she wasn't feeling great. But listen, we need to have high expectations for our kids. And yes, employers want people who are team players, but they also want individuals that can add and subtract at a sophomore level, that do math at a sophomore high school level, who can write and spell at a sophomore high school level. That's going to be critical to their success in college or not, or in the workplace. And so holding them to that standard, I don't believe is unreasonable. And we really should be focusing the resources on getting the assistance to those that have unique challenges. So to me, we can make improvements to the MCAS. That it should be talked about. And if there was actually an agreed upon unified state standard to replace or improve upon what we've got, we might be here having a different conversation. But which is, voting yes on question 2 means we are abandoning a statewide assessment tool that is shown to be enormously successful and really kind of lowering the bar for our kids, which is what we should not be doing. We should be having a conversation, whether it be through legislation or other things, about improving the MCAS, providing some more alternative pathways, but we should be maintaining high standards for our kids.
As we're getting close to the time, I think maybe we're even like a smidge over it. I want to thank both Melissa and Tim for your time, your expertise this evening on this subject. It's been a great honor to moderate tonight in this important ballot question with these two incredibly important and active community leaders and advocates. And to hear more from both sides on this is really important for our community to hear that. We'll have a quick poll in a minute. Just as a reminder, click on any of the links in the chat regarding voter registration. If you're not sure where to vote, what your ballot's going to look like, it's really important to take a minute to do that. And the deadline for voter registration is October 26th. And you can learn more about your voting locations as well.
Awesome.
I want to give a shout out to and appreciation for all the educators out there, the para educators, the staff in the school, all the folks making things, helping out every day, making it successful in our schools and for our communities and for our kids. And then a huge shout out to our students, our parents, our caregivers, all the folks that are supporting them and making things possible additionally. So and now I'll turn it over to our Deputy Director, Emily Dodge.
I just want to quickly say thank you to Dina and thank you to everyone at WEC and thank you for everyone that came on, and Tim especially. It's been a pleasure counterpointing our thoughts.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. And let me just echo Dina in thanks to Tim and Melissa. Appreciate you laying out these arguments. Of course, Dina, we also want to thank you for your deft moderation this evening. We know that there were quite a few questions in the chat, which is great to see the engagement. We will take a look at those and include a frequently asked question document when we send out all of the event materials. And yes, I saw a request in the chat. We will absolutely do the post-event poll. Let me get that up very quickly for folks who have one more minute to weigh in here. After this event, let us know how you're planning to vote on this ballot question. for folks who do need to head out as this is happening, you can expect those event resources to be heading to your inbox as soon as we are able to get those processed in the next few days. And be sure to feel free to reach out if you have any questions. So with that, I'm going to see where we're at with the final results here. We have now shifted from about 50% to 62% of folks planning to vote yes. Our undecided set of voters here went from 35% down to 6%. And the voting no also increased from 14% to 33%. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. We appreciate your time, and we hope you have a great evening.
Thank you again, everyone. Have a good evening.